Hello students, today we're going to talk about the simple present and present progressive tenses. This presentation was created by one of my co-teachers, Marianne Mercer. Let's start by reviewing what tenses are. A verb tense gives an action a flow of time. There are three main verb tenses in English: present, past, and future. The past is used to describe things that have already happened. For example, earlier in the day, yesterday, or 3 years ago. The present tense is used to describe things that are happening right now, or things that are continuous, or things that regularly happen. The future tense describes things that have yet to happen. For example, later, tomorrow, next week, or 5 years from now. They're usually things that we think will happen in the future. Furthermore, each of these main tenses have 4 different ways of telling time or describing the flow of time: the simple, progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive tenses. You will learn about these 12 verb tenses as you move on to the next levels. We're going to call them tenses in this class, but as you get to advanced classes, they might call them aspects or maybe something different because they're not exactly tenses. But there are at least 12 different ways of describing or talking about time in English. Today, we're focusing on the simple present and the present progressive. Verb tenses can be very difficult to understand for different students because different cultures think differently about time. China, for example, does not have grammatical verb tenses. Indonesia and other countries tell time through adverbs. English, however, gives many details about time and action. We use tenses, we use other helping words like modals, and we use adverbs and adjectives and time expressions to describe the flow of time when we are speaking or writing sentences. It is difficult to think about time differences that do not exist in your own language. This is why practicing the English tenses is very important, and it may take a while to master all of these 12 tenses or aspects. And we'll go through this. This is level 0 and 1, and you'll continue to learn about these tenses through level 2 and 3 and 4, and as you get into college level. Let's start by talking about the simple present. The simple present is used in 3 main ways: for present or current actions and conditions, for example, the apples are rotten, or for regular actions and conditions like routines or habits, for example, I drive to work every day, or for things that are true like facts and for constant conditions. For example, human blood is red. That's something that's always true. Now let's talk about forming the simple present. When using the simple present, most pronouns or nouns are formed by using the root form of the verb, with the exception of the third person singular, which needs an S or ES at the end of the root verb form. There's another video that I will put a link up on to explain more about this, but here are some examples. For the first person singular, like I, we say I write. Second person singular, you, we say you write. Third person singular, that is he, she, or it, we could say the teacher writes, or he writes, or she writes. Notice the S at the end. For first person plural, we just say we write. For second person plural, you, we just say you write. And third person plural, they, we say they write, or the students write. Note, you can replace any pronoun with a noun as long as it is the equivalent of the same pronoun. In other words, I could say the teacher writes, or I could say he writes. I could say the students write, or I could say they write. There are some verbs that may need an ES instead of the S to form the third person singular in the simple present tense. These verbs are easily memorized as their root verb form ends in O, CH, SH, TH, double S, X, and Z. Look at these examples. For the first person singular, I brush. For third person singular, he, she, or it, we could say Anna brushes or she brushes. First person singular, I toss. Third person singular, Terry tosses or he tosses. First person singular, I go. Third person singular, he, she, or it, we could say she goes or Janie goes. Notice how we change the root form or the base form, and then we add an es at the end. Let's talk about making negative statements in the simple present tense. To make negative statements, one must use the following formula. Use do or does, and then not, and then the root form of the verb. Do or does is called the auxiliary verb, and we need this auxiliary before not when we're making negative statements. Look at these examples. Chris does not like avocados, or Chris doesn't like avocados. Her friends do not agree. Her friends don't agree. I do not want to go anywhere. I don't want to go anywhere. In academic writing, we usually spell out the whole word does not. Chris does not like avocados. But when we're speaking, we often use the contraction doesn't. Chris doesn't like avocados. Or don't. Her friends don't agree. To make the verb to be negative, we use to be and then not. So with the be verb, it's a little bit different. Look at these examples. I am not failing this class, but some students may. She is not ready for the next level. She isn't ready for the next level. So with the be verb, it's a little bit easier to form the negative. You just add not after the be verb. For other verbs, you'll need to use the auxiliary, do or does. Let's talk about making questions. To ask questions using the simple present tense, use the following formulas. For yes/no questions, you can use do or does, that's the auxiliary, plus the subject, plus the root form of the verb. For WH questions, you can use a WH word, like who, what, where, when, why, how, or how much. Then use do or does, then the subject, and then the root form of the verb. With modals, like can, could, may, should, or shall, you use the modal first, then the subject, and then the root form of the verb. Let's look at some examples. Do you know how to change a tire? So there you see do or does, then the subject, and then the root form of the verb. Do you know? How much does this sweater cost? That's a WH question. We have how much, that's a WH word. Then we have do or does. We use does because the subject is singular. So we say how much does this sweater cost? Cost is the root form of the verb. And then for modals, can I go to the bathroom? Can is the modal, subject is I, go is the root form of the verb. We use this many times to ask permission to do something. We will talk about these more in detail in the future. Let's talk about using adverbs of frequency. In the simple present tense, adverbs of frequency are often used. Adverbs of frequency are adverbs that are used to say how often a person does things or how often things happen. On the left, you see things that happen always, 100% of the time, always. Then, usually, that could be about 90% of the time. Normally, or generally, is about 70 to 80% of the time. Often and frequently, again, 60, 70, 80% of the time is often or frequently. Sometimes is like 50-50, sometimes. Then down below, you see some adverbs that are describing things that happen less often. Occasionally or not very often, that could be like 30% of the time. Seldom could be like 15% of the time. Hardly ever or rarely is like 5% of the time. And then never is never, 0% of the time. These percentages are not exact, but they give us a general idea about which adverb of frequency to use based on how often something happens. Adverbs of frequency are usually placed before the main verb or between the auxiliary and the main verb. However, some adverbs, such as sometimes and usually, can go at the beginning of the sentence. In addition, adverbs of frequency can come after the verb to be. Here are some examples. I usually do my laundry on Sundays. I do occasionally wash my clothes on Fridays. Sometimes I do my laundry on Saturdays. It is never late to say sorry.